She tried to leave him in the middle of the night, but what she didn't know was that he had already been standing in the rain, waiting for her all along. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of the stories waiting to find you next. If I had known this was how my story would begin, standing at the edge of a life I never wanted, marrying a man I never met, I might have run sooner. I might have torn the delicate stitches of this old hand-sewn dress with my bare hands, thrown open the chapel doors, and disappeared into the night. But I didn't run. Not yet. Instead, I stood in front of a rain-soaked window on the second floor of Blackstone Manor, my fingers tracing the warped outline of my reflection in the glass. The storm outside had swallowed the city, turning the night into a blur of trembling lights and restless shadows. Thunder rumbled low in the distance, like the steady hum of something inevitable closing in. And there I was, Anna Nguyen, 23, daughter of a dying florist, wearing a dress that didn't belong in this place or on this night. The fabric clung to my skin, the same fabric my mother had once stitched by hand in the back of our tiny shop. She used to hum old love songs while she worked, fingers moving with quiet care over every thread. I remembered sitting on the floor beside her, my head on her lap, dreaming of the day I'd wear it for someone who loved me, someone I chose. But love had no place here tonight. This wasn't a wedding. It was a transaction, a debt paid with my life. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, letting the chill seep into my skin as the memory of this morning played on a loop in my head. My father, desperate and pale, had handed me a folded piece of paper, the marriage contract that sealed my fate. The Blackstones had the power to erase every cent of our debt, to save my mother's life, to keep the shop alive. All they wanted in return was me. A knock on the door broke through the weight of my thoughts. 5 minutes. A voice called softly from the hallway. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and turned back to the vanity table. I reached for the pearl hairpin my mother had left. For me, her last gift before her body gave in to the sickness she had hidden for so long. My hands trembled as I pinned back the loose strands of hair framing my face. I didn't recognize the girl in the mirror anymore. She looked like a stranger in her own skin. That's when I noticed the corner of something sticking out from the drawer. A slip of faded paper, yellowed at the edges. Curiosity gripped me harder than fear. I slid the drawer open. It was a letter, creased and fragile, as if it had been read too many times. My mother's handwriting curved across the page, shaky but unmistakable. To my daughter, there are things you may never understand about the choices I made, the people I left behind. There was a man once, a man whose name I dare not speak again. His family, the Blackstones, they took more from me than you will ever know. I left that life behind for you. But if you ever find yourself standing at their door, walk away. Please, Anna, walk away. I couldn't breathe. My heart slammed against my ribs as I read the name again. Blackstone. My vision blurred as the weight of her warning settled over me like iron shackles. She knew. She had always known. And now, I was walking straight into the very life she had begged me to avoid. Another knock. Louder this time. Anna, they're waiting. I shoved the letter into my purse with shaking hands, my breath coming fast and shallow. I wanted to scream, to lock the door and never come out. But the memory of my mother's frail smile, her voice, whispering, "Stay strong for me, sweetheart," kept me standing. I walked out into the dimly lit hallway, my steps heavy on the polished floor. The silence stretched around me like a noose, tightening with every breath. At the end of the hall, the heavy oak doors of the chapel stood half open. Through the narrow gap, I could see them all, rows of unfamiliar faces, their heads turned toward the altar. And there he was, Aidan Blackstone, tall, unmoving. A storm of a man in a tailored black suit, standing beneath a chandelier that cast pale light over his sharp features. He didn't smile. He didn't look for me. To him, this wasn't a wedding. It was business, a contract, a price paid. I stood frozen, my body screaming to turn and run. But I couldn't. Not when I knew what was at stake. I closed my eyes, drew in one last shaky breath, and stepped into the aisle, the distant roar of thunder drowning out the sound of my heart breaking. The first thing I noticed was how cold the air felt inside the penthouse. It wasn't the kind of cold that bit into your skin or made you shiver. It was heavier than that, emptier, like the air itself had learned how to hold its breath. Aiden didn't speak a single word on the ride. Back from the chapel, he didn't touch me. He didn't even look at me. I sat stiffly on the far end of the leather seat in the back of his sleek black car, my hands pressed tightly together in my lap as the city blurred past the windows. My mother's letter burned like a hidden flame, inside my purse, every word echoing louder with every mile that took me further from the life I knew. I risked a glance at him, Aiden Blackstone, the man whose name had loomed over my family like a silent storm for years. His jaw was set in that same sharp, unreadable line I had seen back at the chapel. His hands, strong and steady, rested on his thighs, fingers curled slightly as if resisting some unseen impulse. His profile was all angles and shadows under the low light, dark hair falling slightly over his brow, lips pressed into a thin, emotionless line. I told myself not to care, not to wonder what kind of man could buy a life like mine without flinching. But the truth, I was already unraveling. I hated how much I noticed the small things, the way his throat moved when he swallowed, the slight crack in the leather seat where his wedding band pressed against it, the faint scent of cedar and clean soap lingering in the air between us. I shifted in my seat, looking away, clenching my fists tighter. I would not let him get under my skin. I couldn't afford to. When the car finally stopped, I expected a driver or someone to open the door for me. But there was no one. Aiden reached for the handle himself, stepping out into the dimly lit underground garage without waiting for me to follow. I stared after him for a moment, heart pounding in my throat. Then I stepped out into his world. The elevator ride was silent, the only sound the soft mechanical hum as we ascended floor after floor of his glass and steel fortress. I stood in the far corner, my reflection staring, back at me in the mirrored walls, pale, wide-eyed, trembling. I hated how small I looked next to him, how fragile. When the doors slid open, the first thing that hit me was the view. Glass walls stretched from floor to ceiling, revealing the entire city glittering beneath the night sky. The space was breathtaking. Sleek lines, dark wood floors, minimalist furniture in shades of charcoal and silver. It looked like something out of a magazine, perfect in every way. And yet, it felt like a museum. Beautiful, untouched, cold. Aiden walked ahead, shrugging off his jacket with practiced ease and draping it over the back of a leather chair. He loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and poured himself a drink from the bar without so much as glancing in my direction. I stood frozen near the door, clutching my purse like it was the only thing tethering me to the ground. After what felt like hours, he finally spoke. His voice was low, smooth, but distant. "Your room is the second door on the left." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. That's it? No explanation, no expectations, just a door. My throat tightened, heat creeping up my neck. What did I expect? That he'd suddenly act like a husband? That he'd want me? I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek, fighting the urge to say something. Anything. But I didn't. I couldn't. I turned toward the hallway, my steps faltering as I passed him. I could feel his eyes on my back. Or maybe I just imagined it. Either way, I didn't dare look over my shoulder. The second door on the left opened into a room twice the size of my entire apartment. The bed was massive, covered in crisp white linens. There was a sitting area by the window, a bookshelf lined with hardcovers that looked more decorative than read. A delicate lamp glowed softly in the corner, casting warm light over the empty space. I let my purse slide from my shoulder onto the chair by the window. My fingers found the edge of the fabric, tracing the seam, grounding myself in something real. I didn't cry. I didn't allow myself to. Instead, I walked to the small kitchenette attached to the room. I found a kettle, filled it with water, and set it to boil. Old habits die hard. I reached for the tin of jasmine tea I always carried with me. The scent of dried petals hit me like a wave, pulling me back to my mother's tiny kitchen, to her humming softly under her breath as she brewed tea on rainy afternoons. I held the tin to my chest, closing my eyes, trying to hold on to the memory, trying to remind myself why I was here. This was for her, for the shop, for the only life I'd ever known. The water boiled, and I poured it slowly over the leaves, letting the steam curl around me like a fragile shield. I sat by the window, cradling, the cup in both hands, staring out over the city. That's when I noticed the folder on the desk across the room. My curiosity tugged at me again before I could stop myself. I set the cup down and walked over. The folder was thick, unmarked. I opened it with hesitant fingers. Medical records, treatment plans, receipts, all dated months before the marriage agreement was ever signed, paid in full. Signed, Aiden Blackstone. Pressed a trembling hand to my lips, my heart thundering in my chest. He'd already saved my mother. Long before I ever walked down that aisle, he'd already paid the price. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. Tears I'd held back all night, finally slipping free. And for the first time since the ceremony, I wasn't sure I hated him after all. The rain had started again, just after midnight. Soft at first, almost like a whisper. I stood by the window in my room, watching the city blur under the curtain of misty darkness. The kettle on the counter had gone cold hours ago, untouched since I found those papers. I hadn't dared leave the room since. I didn't know what to think anymore. I didn't know what to feel. Aiden had already saved my mother. Long before this marriage, long before the contract. So why marry me at all? What did he really want? I told myself not to care. But the ache in my chest told me otherwise. I spent hours pacing the room, running through every reason I had to stay. I couldn't find one that belonged to me. The thought hit me so suddenly, it almost knocked the air out of my lungs. I didn't owe him this. Not anymore. He had what he wanted. My father's submission. My family's silence. He didn't even touch me. Didn't even speak to me beyond that one cold sentence when we arrived. Maybe if I left now, he wouldn't stop me. Maybe he'd even be relieved. I grabbed my purse, shoved a jacket over my shoulders, and moved toward the door on shaking legs. Every instinct in me screamed that this was wrong, reckless, foolish, but the walls felt like they were closing in, and the thought of spending another night in this cold, empty place made it impossible to breathe. I slipped through the hallway, pausing to listen for any sound. There was nothing. The penthouse was silent, dark. The elevator stood at the end of the hall, waiting like a quiet promise of freedom. My fingers trembled as I pressed the button. The soft chime felt like a gunshot in the stillness. I stepped in, heart pounding, pulse racing as the doors slid shut. I had no idea where I'd go. I didn't care. I just needed out. When the elevator reached the ground floor, I pulled my jacket tighter around me and headed toward the side exit that led to the alley. The cold hit me like a wave the moment I pushed the door open. The rain had thickened to a steady curtain now, soaking the pavement in sheets of silver. I took one step, then another. I could already see the street ahead, the edge of freedom. But then I heard it. Anna. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat as I turned slowly, my eyes widening when I saw him. Aiden stood in the rain. No coat, no umbrella. His hair hung in dark, wet strands across his forehead, his dress shirt clinging to his skin, soaked straight through. He wasn't standing in the shelter of the awning. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was standing right there, waiting for me, as if he knew exactly what I was going to do. He didn't move. He didn't speak again. He just waited. My legs felt like they might give out. I shook my head, swallowing hard. "What are you doing?" His voice was hoarse when he finally answered. "What do you think?" I hugged my arms tighter around myself, stepping back, the rain soaking through my jacket. "You don't even want me," I whispered. "You haven't looked at me once since we got here." He flinched. It was subtle, but I saw it. "You think I didn't see you in that chapel tonight?" His voice cracked, low and raw. "You think I didn't notice how you looked? Like you were already breaking before you ever said yes?" I stared at him, my throat tightening, the tears burning behind my eyes. I whispered. The rain fell harder between us, pounding on the pavement like a warning. "Then why did you do it?" he rasped. "Why didn't you run?" I let out a strangled breath, clutching my purse like a shield. For my mother, for my family, for the shop. "Why else?" His jaw clenched. Something flickering in his eyes. Something sharp. Something that hurt more than I expected. "And now?" he asked, stepping forward, slowly, carefully, like he was approaching something fragile. "Is that why you're standing out here, trying to run now?" I bit down on my lip until I tasted blood. I couldn't do this. I couldn't face him. Not like this. I turned to leave, but before I could take another step, his hand shot out, catching my wrist. I gasped, spinning back toward him, my breath catching as he pulled me closer. Closer than we'd ever been. His fingers trembled where they held me, but his grip was firm, desperate. "You think I don't want you?" His voice broke on the words, raw and aching. "I've wanted you every second since I saw you standing in that chapel, looking like you were about to shatter." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "But you didn't..." My voice cracked. "You didn't even..." His hand cupped my cheek, warm despite the rain, tilting my face up to meet his gaze. "I didn't know how," he whispered. "I didn't know if you'd ever forgive me for this, for taking you like this." Tears slipped down my cheeks, mixing with the rain. "You didn't take me," I whispered back. "I gave myself, because I had no choice." He flinched again, as if the words physically cut him, but he didn't let go. "Then let me earn it now," he said, so softly I almost didn't hear him. I felt my knees weaken, my heart breaking open in my chest. "Why are you standing in the rain, Aiden?" I choked out, my voice shaking. He leaned in, his forehead pressing to mine, his breath warm on my skin despite the cold. "Because I can't let you walk away," he whispered, "not without fighting for you." And in that moment, I wasn't sure I wanted to walk away anymore. I wish I could tell you I fell into his arms that night, that the rain washed away every fear I carried. But real life doesn't work like that. Sometimes the weight of a single word, Blackstone, can crush you more than any storm. I didn't run. Not that night. Not when he held me in the rain and whispered things I never thought I'd hear from him. but I didn't follow him back. Inside either. I told him I needed air. He nodded like he understood, but I saw the way his fingers twitched, like letting go physically hurt. He didn't press me. He just let me go, and I walked until the city swallowed me whole. By morning, I found myself on the doorstep of the only person I still believed in. "Mom?" My voice cracked as I pushed open the creaky door of our little apartment above the flower shop. The smell hit me first. Dried lavender, warm tea. Home. My mother sat in her favorite chair by the window, a blanket draped over her frail shoulders. She turned her head slowly, her tired eyes lighting up the moment she saw me. "Anna," she breathed, reaching out a trembling hand. I dropped to my knees beside her, pressing my face into her lap like I had when I was a little girl. For the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. Really cry. She stroked my hair in slow, shaky circles. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. I pulled back just enough to look up at her, my vision blurry with tears. "Mom, there's something I need to ask you." She nodded gently, like she'd been waiting for this. I reached into my purse, pulling out the worn letter I had found in the vanity drawer. My hands trembled as I held it between us. "Who is he?" My voice barely made it past my lips. Who is my father?" Her breath hitched. Her fingers tightened around mine. For a long time, she didn't speak. She just stared out the window, her eyes distant, as if she were sifting through years of ghosts. "I was young," she began softly, "and foolish. I thought I could rewrite the rules of the world if I just loved hard enough." My heart pounded in my chest. I already knew where this was going. "I met Jonathan Blackstone at a charity gala," she continued, her voice trembling. "He was older, powerful, and married." My breath caught in my throat. "He promised me everything," she whispered. "A life, a future. But in the end, he chose his family's legacy over me." I bit my lip hard, afraid to ask what came next. "But you didn't marry him," I whispered. She shook her head, tears pooling in her tired eyes. "No. I married your father, Thomas Nguyen. He knew everything, Anna. He knew I was pregnant, with another man's child, and he loved you as his own anyway." My heart cracked open like glass. I wanted to scream, to deny it, to push the truth away. But it was right there, written all over her face. "I'm a Blackstone," I choked out, the words like acid on my tongue. She reached up, cupping my face in her trembling hands. "No, baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You are mine. You are Anna. Nothing else matters." I broke. Right there on the floor, I broke into 1,000 pieces. Because part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to pretend blood didn't matter. But another part of me, the part that had stood in that chapel, shaking in a dress stitched with love and lies, knew better. It was nearly sunset when I returned to the penthouse. I half expected Aiden to be gone, but he was there, standing by the window, staring out over the city like he'd been doing it all night. He turned when he heard me, his expression unreadable. "You didn't run," he said quietly. I swallowed hard, clutching the doorframe like it was the only thing holding me upright. "No," I whispered. "But I should have." His jaw tightened, the muscle in his cheek ticking. I stepped closer, each breath feeling heavier than the last. "Who am I to you, Aiden?" My voice cracked. "A wife? A pawn? Or something worse?" He flinched like the words physically struck him. "What are you talking about?" he rasped. I pulled the letter from my purse, holding it out with shaking hands. "My mother," I whispered. "Jonathan Blackstone. Tell me it isn't true. His face went pale. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, stepping forward like he might take the paper from me. But I pulled it back. I needed to hear it from him. Tell me. He ran a hand through his hair, turning away, bracing his palms on the edge of the desk like the weight of the truth was finally crushing him. I didn't know, he whispered. For God's sake, Anna. I didn't know. My breath hitched. I thought this marriage was revenge, he continued, his voice shaking. But now I don't know what it is anymore. I took another step toward him, my heart racing. Who am I to you, Aiden? I asked again. Softer this time. He turned, his eyes glassy with something I wasn't ready to name. You're the only thing I have left to lose, he whispered. And just like that, the walls between us cracked again. The rain didn't stop. For days. It had crept into every corner of New York, turning the windows of the penthouse into silver-streaked mirrors that reflected back a life I barely recognized anymore. A life where I wore his last name like a borrowed coat 2 sizes too big. Awkward, uncomfortable, and never truly mine. I hadn't seen Aiden since that night in his office. Not really. He moved through the penthouse like a shadow, closing doors, making calls, hosting late-night meetings behind glass walls. Always on the other side of something. Always unreachable. It was as if, the moment I dared to ask him who I really was to him, he had answered me without words. Nothing. That was the answer he left me with. I tried to believe it. I tried to hold on to the bitterness like it could protect me. But I couldn't stop thinking about his voice breaking in that darkened office. You're the only thing I have left to lose. If he meant it, he hid it well. By the 3rd night, I'd had enough. I didn't bother knocking when I pushed open the glass doors to his study. He stood with his back to me, staring out at the storm as if it held the answers to every unspoken question between us. I stayed by the door, gripping the frame so hard my knuckles went white. I know what you're doing, I whispered, my voice barely more than breath. His shoulders stiffened, but he didn't turn. You think if you push me far enough, I'll be the one to end this. You think if you make me feel small enough, I'll walk away. Like that would make you the victim instead of the one who started this whole mess. His hands curled into fists at his sides. You're wrong. The words cracked like a whip between us, sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. I took one step into the room, then another, and another. I've stood by while you locked me out of every part of your life, I whispered. But you forget something, Aiden. I didn't ask for this marriage, but neither did you. He turned then, slowly, like the effort cost him something. His eyes, dark and burning, locked onto mine, and for the first time in days, I didn't flinch. I stood my ground. You said I was the only thing you had left to lose, I continued, my throat tightening. But you've spent every second since pushing me closer to the door. His jaw flexed, the muscle ticking like he was fighting back. Something brutal. You think I don't know what this is costing you? I pressed, stepping closer. You think I don't see what you're doing? Building your walls higher and higher so you don't have to feel anything? So you don't have to admit that maybe, just maybe, you need me? He flinched like I'd slapped him. I swallowed hard, the words spilling faster now, my breath catching on everyone. Well, here's something you need to hear. Aiden Blackstone, I don't need you. I saw the flicker of pain flash across his face before he masked it again. But you, I whispered, my voice breaking. You need me. You need me to breathe, don't you? He closed the distance between us so fast, it knocked the air from my lungs. His hands were on my face before I could move, cupping my cheeks with a desperation I hadn't seen in him since that night in the rain. His forehead pressed to mine, his breath shaking against my lips. I tried. Anna. God. I tried so hard not to, he rasped. I thought if I could just keep you at arm's length, I could control it. But I can't. His hands trembled where they held me, like he was afraid I'd vanish if he let go. I can't breathe without you anymore. Tears blurred my vision as I stood frozen in his hold, every piece of me breaking wide open. Then prove it, I whispered, barely able to get the words out. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his thumb brushing away the tears on my cheek. How? His voice cracked. Tell me how. I swallowed hard, searching his face for something I wasn't sure I'd find. Let me stand beside you, I whispered. Not behind you. Not locked away in this penthouse like some dirty secret. If you really need me, let me fight with you. For this. For us. He closed his eyes like the words physically hit him. When he opened them again, something in his expression had shattered. The cold CEO was gone. All that was left was the man I had almost given up on. The man standing in front of me, trembling, like I held his life in my hands. He nodded once, sharp, raw, real. Okay, he whispered, and for the first time, I believed him. I expected the war to start in boardrooms, in courtrooms, under blinding city lights, but I never expected it to walk through the front door. Her name was Sarah Blackstone. I didn't recognize her at first. The woman who stood at the threshold of the penthouse that afternoon looked nothing like the cold, perfect family portraits I'd seen in magazines. She was older than I imagined, early 40s maybe, with dark hair streaked silver at the temples and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She carried no security, no entourage, no announcement. She just walked in like she belonged there. Like she still owned every inch of this empire Aiden had nearly burned himself alive trying to rebuild. I stood frozen by the kitchen island, my hands tightening around the coffee mug I hadn't touched in hours. My heartbeat stuttered in my chest as I watched Aiden come to a dead stop at the sound of her voice. Hello, little brother. The words hit him like a blow. He turned slowly, and the air between them snapped so tight I thought it might crack. The glass windows surrounding us. What are you doing here, Sarah? His voice was lower than I'd ever heard it. Dark. Dangerous. Sarah tilted her head, her smile sad and strange. I came to tell you the truth, she said softly. I didn't know what she meant. Not yet. But the way Aiden paled told me he already did. She waited until we sat in the sunken living room, the rain tapping softly against the windows like a ticking clock. I sat stiffly beside Aiden on the leather couch, my heart beating a mile a minute. Sarah perched on the edge of the armchair across from us, hands folded in her lap, her gaze flicking between us like she was measuring the weight of everything. Unsaid. I watched you destroy yourself for him, she began quietly, looking at Aiden. For his approval, for the company, for the name. Aiden flinched, jaw tight. But what he did to you, to me, to her... She glanced at me then, her voice catching. He used us all, she whispered. I swallowed hard. I didn't understand. What do you mean? Used us, I asked, my voice shaking. Sarah's eyes softened when they met mine. He made Aiden believe this marriage was necessary to protect the company, she said, her voice low and steady. But it wasn't. Aiden let out a sharp breath, like the ground had just split beneath his feet. What the hell are you talking about? He rasped. Sarah leaned forward, her voice trembling. Jonathan didn't make this deal to save the Blackstone name. He made it to punish you, I gasped softly, covering my mouth with trembling fingers. Aiden looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He knew you'd never forgive yourself if you married her, Sarah whispered. He knew it would break you. I felt the air leave, my lungs in a rush, the pieces falling into place so fast I could barely hold them. You mean, this wasn't about the company? I choked out. This was about hurting him? Sarah nodded, her eyes filling with something I couldn't name. He wanted you to carry his shame, she whispered, because you were the one thing he could never control. Aiden stood suddenly, running both hands through his hair like he couldn't breathe. He turned his back on us, bracing his hands on the windowsill as if he needed the glass to hold him up. I stood too, my legs shaking. Aiden. He didn't turn. Didn't speak. I moved toward him slowly, every step feeling like it might split me open. When I reached him, I pressed my hand to his back, feeling the way his body trembled beneath my touch. You didn't know, I whispered. He let out, a broken breath, his shoulders shaking. I spent my whole life trying to prove I wasn't like him, he rasped, and in the end, I became exactly what he wanted me to be. I circled around him, cupping his face with both hands, forcing him to look at me. His eyes were wild, glassy, lost. No, I whispered fiercely. No, you didn't. He let out a choked sound, like the weight of it all was too much. I leaned in, pressing my forehead to his, grounding us both. You stood in the rain for me, I breathed. You let me fight for you, for us. You didn't lock me away. You let me in. His hands curled around my wrists, holding on like he was afraid I might disappear. I don't know how to fix this, he whispered. I swallowed hard, blinking. Back tears, then don't fix it alone, I whispered. Let me stay. Let me be yours, not because you're broken, but because I choose you. His breath hitched. His hands slid to my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. Are you sure? He whispered, voice shaking. Even after everything? I nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. Especially after everything. And for the first time, he kissed me. Soft, slow, like he was learning how to breathe again. And I knew we had finally crossed the line neither of us could come back from. We were in this together, for better or worse. I thought the hardest part was over. I thought after that kiss, after everything we had survived, he would finally let me stay, that he would finally stop running from us. But that was the thing about Aiden Blackstone. He didn't just build walls, he built escape routes too. It happened the very next night. The air between us was lighter, softer, like we had cracked open, something neither of us knew how to put words to. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about Sarah's visit. We didn't talk about the wreckage left behind. But something shifted in him. I could feel it. He watched me more now, like he was memorizing the way I moved around the penthouse. Like he didn't trust that I was really still here. And maybe part of me didn't trust it either. It was almost midnight when I found him. Standing by the elevator, car keys dangling from his fingers, the front door cracked open like an invitation. What are you doing? I asked softly, my throat tightening. He turned, and the look on his face nearly knocked the air from my lungs. He wasn't cold. He wasn't distant. He looked terrified. I need to give you something, he whispered. I frowned, stepping closer. What? He held up the keys, his hand trembling just enough for me to see it. Your freedom. I felt the ground shift under me. What are you talking about? I breathed, his jaw clenched, his voice breaking on the words. I've spent every second trying to keep you here, trying to hold you in this life you never asked for. But I can't do that anymore. He swallowed hard, his throat working around the lump I knew was killing him. I can't trap you like he did to us. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I forced myself to stay still. I'm not trapped, I whispered. He let out a ragged breath, shaking his head like he couldn't bear to believe me. You deserve to choose, Anna. You deserve to have a life that doesn't begin with someone else's signature on a contract. I felt something crack, open inside me. Something raw. Something real. Where would I go? I whispered. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear with shaking fingers. Anywhere, he rasped. Anywhere but here, if that's what you want. I felt the tears spill free before I could stop them. I don't know what I want, I choked out. He nodded slowly, pressing the keys into my hand, curling my fingers around them like he was sealing something between us. Then go find out, he whispered. I'll be here, if you ever come back. And just like that, he let me go. Again. The door clicked softly behind me as I stepped into the hallway, my heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't even know if I wanted to leave. But I needed space. I needed to feel the air move around me without walls closing in. So I walked. New York was quieter than I'd ever seen it. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and empty, the city breathing softly beneath a blanket of low clouds. I wandered aimlessly, clutching the keys in my hand like they weighed 1,000 pounds. Every step felt like a question I didn't have an answer to. Could I really leave him? Could I really start over without him? I thought of the way he had looked at me that night in the rain, of the way he had kissed me like I was the only thing keeping him alive. And I knew the truth. I had already chosen him. I had chosen him long before he ever let me go. It was nearly sunrise by the time I found myself back in front of Blackstone Manor. I stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the building that had once felt like a prison. But now, it felt like a question. Was I strong enough to stay? Was I brave enough to love him? Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I took a shaky breath, my heart thundering in my chest. And then I saw him, Aiden, sitting on the front steps, head in his hands, like he hadn't moved since the moment I left. My breath caught in my throat as I watched him lift his head, his eyes, searching the empty street like he didn't dare hope, until they found me, and everything stopped. He stood slowly, like he was afraid any sudden movement might scare me away. I took a step forward, then another, until I was standing right in front of him, tears streaming down my face. He reached out, barely touching my hand, like he didn't believe I was real. And then I laced my fingers through his. I'm here, I whispered. I'm not running anymore. He let out a sound I'd never heard from him before, something between a sob and a breath of relief. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me so tight I could feel every tremble in his body. And for the first time, I held him back. Not because I had to. Not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted to. Because I was home. 1 year later, I used to think home was a place. 4 walls, a roof, a door you could lock behind you. I used to believe freedom was something you earned by walking away. But standing here, in the little house on the edge of the Hudson, with the sunlight pouring through the lace curtains my mother stitched by hand, I realized something much simpler. Home was a person, and freedom was choosing to stay. Aiden stood at the kitchen counter, barefoot, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, carefully pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. The same ones we'd found in a dusty box at a flea market, the day we moved in. He turned his head, smiling softly when he caught me watching him from the doorway. That smile still hit me like the first time every time. I leaned my shoulder against the frame, crossing my arms as I took him in. The way his hair curled slightly, at his temples when he let it grow too long. The way his brow furrowed in concentration, even when doing something as simple as making coffee. This was the man no one else saw. The man I had fought for. The man who had waited in the rain. He walked toward me, handing me the mug with the tiny crack in the handle, the one he always saved for me, claiming it matched my stubborn streak. I wrapped my hands around it, savoring the warmth, the quiet, the peace. We spent the morning in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. My mother sat on the porch, wrapped in a quilt Sarah had sent from upstate. She was stronger now, healthier than any of us dared hope. She still tired easily, but the color had returned to her cheeks, and sometimes I caught her humming under her breath as she watched the garden bloom. I watched Aiden set his coffee down, walking to the small writing desk by the window. He picked up a sheet of paper, glancing at me over his shoulder. I raised an eyebrow. "What are you up to?" He smiled softly, motioning me over. I walked toward him, setting my mug aside, leaning over his shoulder to peek at the page. My breath caught. It wasn't just a letter. It was a vow, handwritten in that sharp, careful script of his. I scanned the words, my heart swelling with every line. I promise to build a life where you never have to question if you're wanted. I promise to fight beside you, not for you. I promise to choose you, not because I have to, but because I always will. Tears blurred my vision as I pressed my hand to my chest. He turned to face me, cupping my cheek with a tenderness that still left me breathless. "We never got to write our own vows," he whispered. "So I thought, maybe we could start now." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I reached for a second sheet of paper, sitting beside him at the desk, my fingers trembling as I picked up the pen. I didn't have to think. The words were already written in my heart. I promise to stand with you in every storm. I promise to see you, even when you try to hide. I promise to come home to you, over and over, for as long as you'll have me. I set the pen down, turning to him with tears streaming down my face. "I never needed the vows to love you," I whispered. "But I think I needed them to forgive myself for being so afraid of you." He pulled me into his arms, holding me like he never wanted to let go. We stayed like that until my mother's soft voice floated through the open window. "You two are going to let the coffee get cold?" she teased. We both laughed, pulling apart, just enough to press our foreheads together, breathing in the quiet that felt like a new beginning. That evening, we sat on the porch with my mother, sipping tea as the sun dipped low over the water. Sarah called, promising to visit next weekend. Aiden handed me the phone, his arm wrapped loosely around my waist as we spoke with her like family, like we'd always been family. And when the stars began to rise, Aiden stood, holding out his hand. "Come with me." I followed him back inside, to the little shelf by the window where I kept my mother's old letters. He pulled down the one I had found on our wedding night, the one that had haunted me for so long. I watched him open a small box beside it, slipping our new vows inside, right next to the words my mother had written. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "What are you doing?" I whispered. He turned to me, brushing my hair back from my face with a smile that made my heart ache in the best way. "Writing a new story," he whispered. "One that belongs to us." I never thought love could feel like this. Quiet, steady, like the hum of something I never wanted to live without. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was ours. And as I stood there in the golden light, wrapped in his arms, I knew one thing for certain. He had waited for me in the rain. And now, I would spend the rest of my life choosing to stay. If this journey touched something in your heart, Don't forget to give this video a like and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us keep sharing stories that remind us all. Sometimes the greatest love comes when we least expect it. We can't wait to have you with us for the next one.